Well, I'm going to have to admit something to y'all. This is not the gospel I read when I was studying. So I was asking, who wants to preach today? Anybody around? Where does this came from? Is that what you guys got up there on the screen? That's the way you guys got it? Huh. Martin, Brent and I talked, this wasn't the text. So that's interesting. That's good, but interesting. So how about instead of me trying to preach on this and just mumble jumble, I preach on what I had. Does that sound better for y'all? Amen? Yeah, because, again, my sermons can go long, and if I'm making it up as I go, we might have to get Les up here to pull me out and try to start preaching. So, you know how long he goes. I mean, great. My story is the story that we normally have heard. Well, we've heard that one too. And I would love to tell you where it is, but again, I'm going to tell you in honesty, I'm blown away. I mean, Brent did it well on me in this one. So I'm going to just go from what I know the text is. Today's text actually that I prepared for fits well with what was just mentioned. It's the text of the woman and the coins at the temple. You guys remember the story? There's the rich men bringing all their bags of money, and there's this woman, this widow, with 2 bags. She just gets her very own, and Jesus sees it. He grabs his disciples to show them. That's the text that I prepared, actually, which I think is a good text. And not because you just heard a stewardship talk, because traditionally that's when you hear that sermon, right? You always hear this faith of the woman sermon when it's time for the preacher to get you to give. And you know what? It's a perfect text for it. So I'm not going to discredit that one bit. It's about a woman's trust in the Lord to provide. And that's just what it means. But in seminary, there's this thing that we like to do. We call it, Where's God? Y'all remember Where's Waldo? That book? How many have ever done that book? Where's Waldo? You open it up, the guy's in red and white, you can't barely find him. It's a great book. Well, we call it in seminary, Where is God? And to use the fun words, we call it the Missio Dei, the mission of God. It's the Where's God in the world right now. And so therefore, in today's text, I started to think, you know what, God? After praying and thinking about what to preach on in that text, I heard God start to say, I want you to preach on my mission. I want you to reveal where I am. So as I started to think, I said, yeah, because that's what today's text does deal with as well. Is God, once again, revealing himself to us in a means that most people never even caught at that time. But before I jump into that text, I want to share a little story that I've come to really like. It's a story about little Timmy and St. Luke's Church in the downtown city. And it kind of goes like this. One Sunday morning, the pastor and the ushers came to church to set up to get ready for Sunday worship service. When they walked in, they saw that the church was broken into and vandalized. And what they saw was the pews were flipped over, the altar was thrown about, banners were sprawled everywhere, graffiti was everywhere, just complete destruction to their sanctuary. And as the ushers and pastors got there, they realized they only had a short time to get everything prepared because they had to get the coffee going. So they did everything they could. They flipped over the pews, they set everything up, they put the banners back where they could. Where the graffiti was, they found more banners because we're Lutherans, we have a lot of banners. They put those banners over that graffiti. But by the very end, when they finally flipped over the altar, set the communion ware there, they moved a banner that was kind of flung over the front. And on the wall in graffiti was written, God is nowhere. Well, I'm guessing these were probably a bunch of men because they found any chemical that they could find to clean it. And they mixed them together without knowing if you're supposed to mix these two together, in the hopes that it would remove what was written there. So they were scrubbing and scrubbing and scrubbing, but to no avail. It did not leave. It was written and permanent. And so the pastor said, we just have to move on. People are starting to come. And as worship began, you could see the energy go from excited to very mellow. Because people were reading what was written. They read that God is nowhere. And the pastor throughout the service encouraged people to focus on him, focus on what's being partaken in, not to focus on what's written on the wall. But the problem was, even the pastor had a hard time doing that. Well, the thing that made it worse was the little Timmy. You all have little Timmy in your life, don't you? It's that little boy that sits in the back. I was the little Timmy, I'd have to say, when I grew up. And little Timmy, to top it off, was learning how to read. So little Timmy's sitting beside his mom in the back of the church. And he keeps on nudging his mom. Mom, I can read what it says. I can read the writing on the wall. And of course, the people around little Timmy were very disgruntled, but as good Lutherans, they ignored it. But the problem is, when you ignore a little boy, do they keep quiet? No. You try to turn the volume down, but for some reason the volume goes up. And so louder and louder little Timmy got, Mom, I can read it, Mom, I can read it. And eventually the little Timmy couldn't stand it anymore, and he stepped up and says, I can read the writing on the wall. It says, God is now here. How great it would be to have eyes like little Timmy, amen? Amen. You know, I don't know if Where's Waldo was around when little Timmy lived, but I bet he would have been phenomenal at it. Because what we just saw was he was able to find where God was in a time no one else could. He was able to point out in the midst of all the distress and frustration that God was there in that church, revealing himself in a way that nobody was ready to see. But he was the one to reveal it. And I think this is exactly what we hear in my text that I chose for today. Because what we see is Jesus taking the role of little Timmy. Because, can't you see it? Jesus is walking in Jerusalem at this time. The end of his journey of life, heading to the cross. And Jerusalem is the place to be. It's where all the people that are known or are someone go. It's where all the smart people are. And so Jesus is walking down the streets. And I can only see it now. The commotion going on. It'd be like walking in a mall the day after Thanksgiving. You all know how that is, right? Kind of chaotic. All the Christmas specials are out. Commotion everywhere. You smell all these different scents of perfumes and food. You hear kids screaming, parents chasing after them with their carts. People trying to get you in their stores. That's what it was like. Jesus is walking down the streets of Jerusalem, and commotion everywhere. People selling, people trading, children crying, donkeys pulling carts, kids yelling. And there Jesus is. He just stops. And sure enough, amidst all this chaos and commotion, there the temple tax collectors were, doing their duty to collect the taxes for the temple, so the temple could stay running and doing what it does. Well, for some reason, Jesus kind of just stopped and focused on it. Almost, for us, it would be like us stopping in the middle of the mall and focusing on a kiosk. Just kind of out in the middle. And as Jesus stopped there, I see him just kind of leaning back, looking. And as he's looking, he sees these rich people walking with these bags of extra money. Money they don't need. Money that was probably not earned fairly. It was probably taken from the poorer people because they imposed higher taxes or charged them for things that weren't needed to be charged for. But they brought these bags of money so that all people could see how generous they were and set them before the temple, and they would do as they needed to do. But losing this money meant nothing to them. It wasn't needed. Well, at it, Jesus saw this widow. Already the picture has a tint and a taint to it. Because, see, the widow was one that people didn't like to have around, especially in Jerusalem. The widow at that time was the annoying one, the one that was always needing something. So you have a picture painted of this glorious place, then all of a sudden they just punch in there the widow. And Jesus sees her.